The humid air in the old house was thick with the smell of wilted lilies and dust, a cloying sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. It was the scent of endings. I stood in the doorway of my father's study, my hand resting on the cool, smooth grain of the oak doorframe, and watched my older brother, Marcus, as he ran a finger along the spine of our father's beloved collection of leather-bound classics. The room was a tomb, preserved exactly as it had been the day Dad's heart, worn out from 78 years of a life that had been both generous and difficult, had simply stopped. The only light came from a single green-shaded banker's lamp on the desk, casting long, dancing shadows that made the bookshelves seem to sway. "He always loved this room," Marcus said, his voice a low, practiced rumble that felt too large for the quiet space. He didn't turn to look at me. Said it was the only place a man could think. I could feel the worn Persian rug under my thin-soled shoes, its intricate patterns faded by decades of sunlight and the press of my father's footsteps. "He loved the garden more," I replied, my own voice sounding small and brittle. "Said the roses didn't talk back." That finally made him turn. Marcus was 2 years my senior, but in the dim light, with the silver threading through his dark hair and the new, permanent lines of authority around his mouth, he looked a decade older. He had always carried the weight of the world on his broad shoulders, a weight he seemed to believe was his birthright. I, Clara, had always been the one who chased the light, the artist, the dreamer. The one who left. "The lawyer will be here in 10 minutes, he stated, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my simple black dress, the one I'd bought off the rack for this very occasion. It felt cheap and scratchy against my skin. "I trust you can be civil." The condescension was a familiar chill. "I'm always civil, Marcus. It's you who mistakes silence for agreement." A muscle twitched in his jaw. The sound of a car door shutting outside was a sharp, definitive crack in the heavy afternoon silence. We both flinched, a tiny, synchronized admission of the tension that was coiling in the room, as tangible as the dust motes swirling in the lamplight. Mr. Albright, my father's attorney for over 40 years, entered with a solemn nod. He was a small, neat man with hands that were surprisingly soft when he shook mine, his grip tentative. He carried a simple brown leather briefcase, its surface scarred and shiny with age. The three of us sat in the high-backed chairs facing my father's empty desk, an arrangement that felt both formal and profoundly wrong. The air was so still I could hear the faint, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a heartbeat the house had stolen back from its late owner. "Eleanor, Marcus," Mr. Albright began, placing the briefcase on his knees and clicking the brass latches open. The sound was unnaturally loud. "Your father was a very precise man. He wanted his final wishes to be clear and unequivocal." He withdrew a single, crisp document. The paper was a stark, blinding white against the dark wood of the room. My heart began to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The final word. The last message from a man who had spoken so little in life. I, Robert Samuel Miller, being of sound mind and body, Mr. Albright's voice was dry and precise, a perfect match for the legal language. He read through the standard clauses, the small bequests to longtime friends and the housekeeper. He confirmed the house itself, this beautiful, burdensome old Victorian filled with a lifetime of memories, was to be sold, with the proceeds divided equally. I felt a pang of loss at that, a physical ache for the creaky third step on the staircase, the view of the sprawling oak tree from my childhood bedroom window. But it was practical. Neither of us could afford its upkeep. Then he came to the heart of the matter. The business. Miller and Son Construction. There was no son in the name anymore, not since I'd left, but the legacy of it was woven into the very fabric of our family. It had been my grandfather's, then my father's. It was supposed to be Marcus's. It was the source of his pride and, I had always believed, the root of the slow-brewing resentment between us. Regarding the ownership and operations of Miller and Son Construction, Mr. Albright read, adjusting his glasses. "I bequeath my entire controlling interest, comprising 51% of the company's shares, to my daughter, Clara Marie Miller." The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound, it was a physical force, sucking the air from the room. I felt my mouth go dry. I must have misheard. I looked at Marcus. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were a turbulent, stormy sea of pure shock. And then, something else. A dawning, cold fury. "To Clara," he whispered, the word a ragged tear in the quiet. Mr. Albright continued, his voice unwavering. "And to my son, Marcus David Miller, I bequeath the remaining 49%. It is my wish that Clara, with her fresh perspective and understanding of modern design, will guide the company into its future, while Marcus, with his unparalleled knowledge of its day-to-day operations, will continue as its chief operating officer." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a bequest, it was an earthquake. Dad had given me control. He had seen me, the daughter who had painted and traveled and lived a life so different from his own, as the one to lead his legacy. The emotion that rose in me was a confusing torrent of validation, grief, and sheer, undiluted terror. I looked at my brother, at the rigid set of his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip he had on the arms of his chair. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "She doesn't know the first thing about the business. She hasn't been here for years. This will destroy everything he built." "The will is quite clear, Marcus," Mr. Albright said gently, though his eyes held a glint of steel. "Your father was very specific. He felt Clara's vision was what the company needed to survive and thrive in a new market." "Her vision?" Marcus let out a short, harsh bark of laughter that held no humor. "She paints pictures of trees. We pour concrete and frame houses. There's a difference." The meeting ended in a frozen, hostile silence. Mr. Albright left us with copies of the document, the paper feeling unnaturally heavy and cold in my hand. The moment the front door clicked shut, Marcus turned on me. "What did you do, Clara?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave, something sharp and expensive, mixed with the sweat beading on his temples. "What did you say to him when you came to visit last month? Did you fill his head with some pathetic story about how I'd frozen you out?" "I didn't say anything," I protested, my voice trembling. "I was just spending time with him, Marcus. We talked about my art, his garden, we didn't even talk about the company." "I swear." "Don't lie to me," he roared, and the sound echoed through the still house, making the crystals on the chandelier in the hallway tremble. "You swooped in at the end, playing the devoted daughter, and you manipulated a sick, old man. You stole my birthright. It wasn't just yours." I shot back, anger finally overriding my shock. "It was our family's. And maybe, just maybe, Dad saw something in me that you never have. Maybe he wanted it to be more than just your personal kingdom." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The look in his eyes was one of pure, undiluted betrayal. "Get out," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Get out of his house." I left. I walked out into the damp, cool evening air, the copy of the will clutched in my hand like a weapon I didn't know how to use. The victory, if that's what it was, felt hollow and poisonous. I had gained a company, but I could feel the last fragile thread connecting me to my brother snapping into two. The weeks that followed were a cold war waged in conference rooms and through terse, formal emails. I tried to step into my new role, my stomach a knot of anxiety every time I walked through the doors of the company's headquarters. The place smelled of sawdust, fresh coffee, and stale testosterone. The employees, men who had known Marcus since he was a boy trailing after my father, looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and open hostility. Marcus was a ghost in the machine, his presence felt in every silent treatment, every delayed report, every decision that was mysteriously reversed without my input. He played the part of the dutiful, wounded son perfectly in public, but in our private interactions, he was a glacier, slow, immovable, and bitterly cold. We had our first official board meeting a month after the reading of the will. It was held in the company's main conference room, a space dominated by a massive, polished table made from reclaimed barn wood, a piece my father had been particularly proud of. The air was chilled by an overzealous air conditioner, and I rubbed my arms, feeling the goosebumps rise on my skin. I proposed a new initiative, a line of sustainable, architecturally designed tiny homes. It was a passion project, something I believed could tap into a new market and revitalize the brand. I had slides, cost projections, everything. Marcus waited until I was finished, until the last image had faded from the screen. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "It's a charming idea, Clara," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Very artistic. But Miller & Son builds family homes. Solid, dependable structures that last for generations. We don't build trendy playhouses for hipsters." A few of the older board members chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. My face burned. "It's not a playhouse, Marcus. It's a viable business model. The market research supports it." "The market research," he repeated slowly, as if the words were foreign. "Your father built this company on handshakes and reputation, not on reports from some overpriced consultant. We have 3 major subdivisions in development. That's where our focus needs to be. Not on your little hobby." The meeting devolved after that, a slow, painful death of my proposal. I was overruled at every turn. I left the room feeling humiliated and powerless. He was right about one thing, I didn't understand the intricate politics of this world. But I was beginning to understand the depth of my brother's resolve to make me fail. The true battle began over the Henderson account, our biggest and most prestigious client. Old man Henderson had been a friend of my father's, and he was building a custom, multi-million-dollar home on the lakefront. It was a project my father had personally overseen from its inception. Now, it was in limbo. Marcus insisted we follow the original, somewhat dated plans. I argued for a few modern, client-requested modifications that would improve energy efficiency and the flow of natural light. It was a minor point, but it became the hill we both chose to die on. The conflict escalated from emails to shouted arguments in my office, the scent of his cologne and my perfume mingling with the smell of our rage. "You are going to drive away our most important client with your incompetent meddling," he yelled one afternoon, slamming his hand on my desk so hard a framed photograph of my father and me rattled. "He's my client too," I yelled back, standing to face him, my knees shaking. "And he likes my ideas? You're just too stubborn and proud to admit that maybe, just maybe, I have something to contribute. You contribute nothing but chaos." His face was a mottled red. "I will not let you dismantle our father's legacy out of some childish need for validation." We were at a stalemate. The Henderson project stalled. The tension in the office became a thick, toxic fog that everyone breathed in. I started having trouble sleeping, my mind racing with financial figures and the cold, hard truth that I was losing. I was an outsider in my own company. It was on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 3 months after my father's death, that everything changed. I was in the office late, trying to make sense of a pile of invoices, when my cell phone buzzed. It was Mr. Albright. "Clara," his voice was quiet, strained. "I need to see you." "Not at the office." "Somewhere, discreet. Can you meet me at the Green Arbor Cafe? In 30 minutes? A cold dread, entirely different from the hot anger of my fights with Marcus, trickled down my spine. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I'll explain when I see you," he said, and hung up. The Green Arbor was a quiet, bookish cafe tucked away on a side street, a place my father had loved for its strong coffee and silence. It smelled of damp wool and roasting beans. Mr. Albright was seated in a worn leather booth in the back, a steaming mug untouched before him. He looked older than he had at the reading of the will, his face etched with new lines of worry. "Thank you for coming, Clara," he said as I slid into the seat opposite him. His fingers were nervously tracing the rim of his mug. "What's this about, Mr. Albright?" I asked, my stomach clenching. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "What I am about to tell you, it could cost me my career. It certainly goes against every professional protocol I have upheld for 45 years. But your father, Robert, was more than a client. He was a friend. And what's happening, it isn't right." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a profound, weary sadness. "The will I read to you and your brother, it was not your father's final will." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The gentle jazz music playing in the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, it all faded into a dull, roaring silence. "What?" I managed to whisper. "2 weeks before he died, your father executed a new will," Mr. Albright said, his voice barely audible. "He came to my office. He was weak, but his mind was crystal clear. He was concerned. Deeply concerned about Marcus." "Concerned how?" "He felt that Marcus had become obsessive. That his ambition for the company was blinding him to everything else, to family, to ethics. Your father had discovered some creative accounting on a recent project. Nothing provably illegal, but deeply troubling. He believed Marcus was preparing to push you out entirely after he was gone. So, he revised his will. He left you the controlling share, yes, but he also set up a separate, irrevocable trust for Marcus's children, a fund they would receive for their education, to be managed by you. It was his way of protecting them, and of ensuring you had a real stake in the company's future." I felt like I was drowning. "So the will you read, it was real?" "It was," he nodded. "But it was superseded. The new will was the valid one. I filed it with the probate court myself." "Then? I don't understand." Mr. Albright's face tightened. "The day after your father passed, Marcus came to see me. Alone. He was calm. Too calm. He said he knew about the new will. He said that if I did not misplace it and proceed with the previous version, the one that left the company split evenly, with no controlling interest for you, he would ruin me." "How?" The word was a gasp. He had dug up something from my past, Clara. A mistake I made very early in my career, a small, stupid act of negligence on a real estate filing that I had buried. It was decades ago, but if it came to light, the Bar Association would revoke my license in an instant. My reputation, my life's work, it would be dust. His eyes glistened with unshed tears of shame. He threatened to expose me. He said it would be my word against his, and who would they believe? The grieving son of a beloved local figure, or an old lawyer with a secret? I stared at him, my mind reeling. The image of Marcus, sitting in this very cafe perhaps, coldly and methodically blackmailing our father's oldest friend, made me feel physically ill. "So you hid the real will?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of horror and a strange, burgeoning relief. I wasn't going crazy. My father had believed in me. Marcus had stolen it. I told the probate court the new will could not be located, he whispered, hanging his head. And that, in its absence, the previous will was the valid document. I am so sorry, Clara. So terribly sorry. The guilt has been eating me alive. Watching you two tear each other apart, knowing I was the cause? I can't do it anymore. Your father's true final wish was for you to lead the company. Marcus committed a fraud to stop that. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He slid it across the table. It felt heavy, final. This is a copy of the true, final will and testament of Robert Samuel Miller, executed and witnessed. The original is in a safety deposit box. The key is paperclipped to the copy. It's all there. My fingers closed around the envelope. It wasn't just paper, it was a weapon. It was the truth. It was my father's voice, rising from the grave to correct a terrible wrong. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, looking at the broken man in front of me. Because the Henderson Project, he said, meeting my gaze. I heard about the fight. Marcus is using it to prove you're incompetent. If he succeeds in pushing you out based on that, the court might never reinstate you, even with the true will. You have to act now. Before it's too late. I stood up, the envelope feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. Thank you, Mr. Albright. For finally telling me the truth. He just nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek. I walked out of the cafe into the cool, damp night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shiny under the amber glow of the streetlights. I got into my car but didn't start the engine. I just sat there, in the dark, holding the envelope in my lap. I thought of my brother, the boy who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had defended me from bullies in the schoolyard. I thought of the man he had become, calculating, ruthless, willing to destroy a family friend and betray his own sister and his own father's dying wish. The love I had for that boy was a real, physical ache in my chest. But the man he was now, he had declared war on me. And he had cheated. I knew what I had to do. It would break my mother's heart. It would shatter our family into a million pieces, pieces that could never be glued back together. It would be ugly, and public, and painful. But my father had chosen me for a reason. He had seen a strength in me that I had never quite believed in myself. He had trusted me with his life's work. And Marcus had tried to steal that trust. I started the car. The engine purred to life, a low, determined sound. I pulled out into the quiet, wet streets, the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. I wasn't driving home. I was driving to my brother's house. He needed to see what was in this envelope. He needed to look me in the eye when he realized his fraud had been discovered. The war was over. The battle for the truth was just beginning. The tires of my car crunched over the wet gravel of Marcus's driveway, a sound that seemed to echo the grinding of my own nerves. His house was a monument to his success, a sprawling modern structure of glass and steel that stood in stark contrast to our father's warm, cluttered Victorian. It was always impeccably lit, but tonight the numerous windows glared like cold, unblinking eyes, reflecting the dark, swirling clouds above. I could see the faint, blue flicker of a television screen from the great room. My hands were trembling as I killed the engine. I clutched the envelope, the paper now slightly damp from my own sweat. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart, I stepped out into the chilly night air. The scent of recently cut grass and damp earth filled my lungs, a deceptively peaceful aroma. I walked to the massive front door, my footsteps silent on the imported slate, and rang the bell. The chime was a deep, resonant, two-tone sound that felt like a judgment. I heard footsteps, then the door swung open. It was Sarah, Marcus's wife. She was dressed in expensive-looking yoga attire, her face initially arranged in a polite, hostess smile that faltered the moment she saw me. Her eyes, a warm brown I had always found kind, darted from my face to the envelope in my hand. "Clara," she said, her voice laced with surprise and a hint of wariness. What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "I need to see Marcus, Sarah," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's urgent." She hesitated, her gaze lingering on the envelope for a second too long. She knew. Maybe not the specifics, but she knew the tension between us, knew her husband was capable of hard things. "He's in his study," she said finally, stepping back to let me in. I'll go get him." The interior of their home was as cool and perfect as a museum, smelling of lemon-scented polish and faintly of the lavender diffuser Sarah loved. It was devoid of the comforting, lived-in chaos of our childhood home. I stood in the cavernous foyer, listening to the muffled sound of Sarah's voice and then the deeper, sharper tone of Marcus responding. A moment later, he appeared at the end of the hall, his silhouette framed by the light from his study. "Clara," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "To what do I owe this pleasure? Here to resign in person?" A faint, cruel smile touched his lips. I walked towards him, my legs feeling like wood. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tight set of his jaw. I could smell the faint, peaty scent of the scotch he'd been drinking. "No, Marcus," I said quietly. "I'm not resigning." I held out the envelope. He looked at it, then back at me, his expression one of bored impatience. "What's this? Another one of your business proposals?" "It's Dad's will," I said. "His real will. The one he signed 2 weeks before he died. The one you forced Mr. Albright to hide." The change in his face was instantaneous and terrifying. All the color drained from his skin, leaving it a sickly, grayish pallor. The arrogant mask shattered, replaced for a single, unguarded moment by pure, undiluted panic. It was there in the wild dilation of his pupils, in the tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. He recovered quickly, his features hardening into a mask of cold fury, but I had seen it. I had seen the truth in his eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. He made no move to take the envelope. "Albright is a senile old fool. You're desperate, and you're lying." "Am I?" I pressed, my own anger beginning to burn through the cold dread. "It's all here, Marcus. Dated, witnessed, notarized. It leaves me 51% of the company. It establishes a trust fund for your children, managed by me. Dad knew what you were. He knew you were cutting corners, that you were prepared to cheat. He did this to protect the company from you. And you committed fraud to stop him." He took a step closer, his body radiating a heat that felt violent. "You listen to me, you little bitch," he hissed, his breath hot on my face. "You walk out of here right now, and you forget you ever saw that piece of paper. You take your pathetic little share of the company, and you go back to your paints and your canvases. This is my company. It was always meant to be mine." "It was his to give," I shot back, my voice rising, echoing in the stark hallway. "And he gave it to me. You didn't just betray me, Marcus. You betrayed Dad. You betrayed his final wish. You're a thief." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and final. His hand shot out and he snatched the envelope from my grasp. He didn't open it. He just stared at it, his chest rising and falling rapidly. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the frantic search for a way out, for a new angle of attack. "You have no proof of any of this," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. It was now the voice of a cornered animal. "It's your word against mine. And who do you think people will believe? The daughter who flitted around Europe for a decade, or the son who was here, building the business, taking care of his ailing father?" "Mr. Albright will testify," I said, though the threat felt flimsy even to me. He was a broken man, and his own secret made him a vulnerable witness. Marcus let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "Albright? The man who misplaced a legal document? His credibility is shot. He'll be disbarred before he can even take the stand. You have nothing." We stood there, locked in a silent, furious stalemate. The house was utterly quiet now. I realized Sarah was standing in the shadows of the living room doorway, her hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She had heard everything. Marcus saw her too. His expression shifted again, from fury to a desperate, manipulative plea. "Sarah, she's lost her mind," he said, his voice softening artificially. "She's trying to destroy me, to destroy our family, because she's jealous. She's always been jealous." Sarah didn't move. She just looked at him, and then at me, and the pain in her eyes was a tangible thing. She knew. She knew her husband was capable of this. It was in that moment, looking at my sister-in-law's shattered face, that I understood the true cost of this fight. This wasn't just about a company. It was about the soul of our family. I could take this to court. I could probably win. But the public spectacle, the legal fees, the utter devastation it would wreak on my mother, on Sarah, on my nieces, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. We would all be left standing in the ashes. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. My father hadn't just given me a company. He had given me a responsibility. A responsibility to be better than this. To be better than Marcus. "I'm not going to court, Marcus," I said, my voice suddenly calm, the anger replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. A flicker of surprise, then triumph, crossed his face. "Smart girl." "I'm not finished," I continued, holding his gaze. "I'm not going to court, because I don't want to watch what's left of our family be torn apart on the public record. For Mom. For your daughters. But understand this, I know. I know what you did. And from this moment on, you will look at me every single day and know that I know. You are a fraud, and I hold the proof." I pointed to the envelope in his hand. "You can burn that. It's just a copy. The original is safe. And here are my terms. My non-negotiable terms." He stared at me, suspicious, confused. "1," I said, counting on my fingers, my hand steady now. "The Henderson project goes forward with my modifications. You will support it, publicly and unequivocally. 2. You will immediately reinstate the trust fund for your daughters, exactly as Dad outlined, with me as the sole trustee. You will sign over the necessary funds. And 3. You will buy me out. His eyes widened. What? You heard me. You will buy my shares. All of them. At a fair market value, to be determined by an independent auditor of my choosing. You want the company so badly? You can have it. All of it. But you will pay me what my share is truly worth. Every single penny. The silence that followed was thick with his shock. This was not the outcome he had expected. He had expected a fight, a scandal. He had not expected me to walk away. You'd just leave? He asked, disbelief coloring his tone. I never wanted the company the way you did, Marcus, I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever said to him. I wanted Dad's respect. And I have it. It's right there, in that envelope. I don't need to run his company to prove that. But I will not let you cheat me. You will pay me for what is mine, and then you can drown in your precious kingdom alone. I could see the wheels turning in his head. This was a way out for him, too. A clean, private, if expensive, exit. He would own Miller & Son outright, free and clear. No more fighting with me. No more boardroom challenges. His pride would be wounded by the payout, but his ambition would be satisfied. And if I agree, he said slowly, you'll never speak of this again? To anyone? Mom? I will never tell Mom, I said, the promise tasting like ash in my mouth. It felt like a betrayal of her, to let her believe a lie, to let her continue to see Marcus as her golden boy. But the truth would kill her. What happens stays in this room. Between us, and Sarah. The official story will be that we had irreconcilable differences about the company's direction, and I decided to sell my stake to pursue other interests. He looked at the envelope in his hand, then back at me. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a weary, calculating acceptance. He had won, but it was a hollow, tarnished victory, and he knew it. He would own the company, but he would have to look in the mirror every day and see the man who had stolen it from his sister. Fine, he said, the word clipped and final. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. I nodded, a single, sharp dip of my chin. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked back down the hall, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. I didn't look at Sarah. I couldn't. I walked out of his house, out of his life, and back into the cool, clean night. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the gleaming, soulless structure that was my brother's home. I didn't cry. I felt emptied out, scraped clean of all emotion. I had lost the company, but I had reclaimed my father's truth and my own integrity. It was a bittersweet trade, but as I started the car and drove away, leaving the shadow of my brother's betrayal behind me, I knew it was the only one I could live with. The following months passed in a strange, liminal space, a period of quiet legal maneuvers and a pervasive, aching sense of loss that had nothing to do with business. The independent auditor, a severe woman with kind eyes, worked efficiently. The valuation of Miller & Son was substantial, a number so large it felt abstract when written out in words on the thick stack of documents. $2,475,000. My share. The day of the signing was held in Mr. Albright's office. The air was stale, smelling of old books and lemonwood polish. Marcus arrived first, with his own lawyer, a slick, younger man who never made eye contact with me. I came alone. We sat on opposite sides of the heavy mahogany table, the polished surface reflecting our tense, silent faces back at us. Mr. Albright presided over the meeting with a quiet, shamed dignity, his hands trembling slightly as he passed the papers across the table for our signatures. The scratch of my pen was the only sound as I signed my name over and over, page after page, severing my legal tie to my father's life's work. Each signature felt like a small death. Marcus signed with quick, aggressive strokes, his jaw clenched tight. He never once looked at me. When it was done, he stood up, gathered his copies, and without a word, walked out of the office. The door clicked shut behind him, a sound as final as a coffin lid closing. It's done, Clara, Mr. Albright said softly, his voice heavy with regret. I hope you can find some peace now. I just nodded, unable to speak. Peace felt like a distant, foreign country. With the money, I did what I had always dreamed of. I bought a small, sun-drenched studio loft in a revitalized part of the city, a space with enormous north-facing windows that flooded the room with a beautiful, constant light. The air smelled of turpentine, fresh gesso, and the rich, earthy scent of coffee that perpetually brewed in my kitchen. I filled the space with my own art, with plants, with the comfortable, mismatched furniture that felt like me. It was a world away from the sawdust and stress of Miller & Son. I started painting again, not the small, safe watercolors I'd dabbled in before, but large, bold, vibrant canvases. I poured all of it onto the cloth, the grief for my father, the betrayal by my brother, the confusing relief of my escape. My first series, which I privately titled The Inheritance, was a critical success at a local gallery show. It wasn't the inheritance of a company, but the inheritance of a fractured family, of silence and secrets, rendered in stark contrasts and hidden, painful textures. Life, as it does, moved on. I dated a little. I traveled. I found a quiet, contented rhythm to my days. But the shadow of my brother was a permanent stain on my heart. Family holidays were a minefield. We maintained a fragile, silent truce for our mother's sake. We would sit at her table for Thanksgiving or Christmas, the air thick with all the words we weren't saying. We spoke in pleasant, hollow platitudes. Please pass the potatoes. The turkey is delicious, Mom. It was a performance, and we were all terrible actors. Mom's eyes would dart between us, filled with a sad, uncomprehending confusion, but she never asked. I think a part of her was afraid of the answer. Then, nearly 3 years to the day after I walked out of Mr. Albright's office, my cell phone rang. It was a Saturday morning. I was in my studio, covered in flecks of cobalt blue paint, listening to the rain patter against the large windows. The name on the screen made my blood run cold. Sarah. We hadn't spoken since that night in their hallway. I hesitated, my paintbrush hovering over the palette. 1,000 catastrophes flashed through my mind. Something with the kids. Something with Mom. Something with Marcus. I wiped my hand on a rag and answered. Sarah? Clara. Her voice was thin, strained, as if it were being stretched over a great pain. I need to see you. Can I come over? An hour later, she was standing in my studio, her designer raincoat dripping onto the sealed concrete floor. She looked older, the lines around her eyes more deeply etched, her once confident posture now slightly stooped. She held a large, flat cardboard portfolio in her arms, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Your space is beautiful, she said, her gaze wandering over the canvases leaning against the walls, the brushes soaking in jars, the general, glorious mess of creation. It feels so alive. Thank you, Sarah, I said, gesturing for her to sit on the worn velvet sofa. Can I get you some coffee? Tea? No, thank you, she said, sitting stiffly on the edge of the cushion. She placed the portfolio carefully beside her. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle drumming of the rain. I'm leaving him, Clara, she said finally, the words dropping into the quiet room like stones. I wasn't as shocked as I thought I would be. I just felt a deep, weary sadness. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. A bitter, tearless smile touched her lips. Don't be. It's been a long time coming. The company, it consumed him. The success, the money, it just made him harder, colder. He's not the man I married. He hasn't been for years. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I knew, Clara. Not everything, not the specifics, but I knew he had done something terrible to you after your father died. That night you came over? I saw his face. I knew. And I stayed. I told myself it was for the girls, for the stability. But I was a coward. You were protecting your family, I offered, though the words felt inadequate. I was enabling a liar, she corrected softly. She took a deep, shaky breath. There's more. The reason I'm here. She gestured to the portfolio. He's in trouble, Clara. Serious trouble. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. What kind of trouble? The company, it's not doing as well as he lets everyone believe. The new subdivisions, he cut too many corners. Used substandard materials. There are lawsuits, pending inspections, it's a house of cards. He's leveraged everything, the house, our savings, to keep it afloat. He's desperate. I thought of my father's fears, his discovery of creative accounting. Marcus hadn't changed, he had just gotten bolder. I'm so sorry, Sarah, I said, feeling a pang of fear for her and my nieces. What can I do? You can't do anything, she said. And I don't want you to. That's not why I'm here. She picked up the portfolio and laid it on her lap. When I told him I was leaving, he shattered. It was ugly. He said things, terrible things. About your father. About you. Her voice broke. He said your father never loved him as much as he loved you. That the company was just a consolation prize. He said you stole his destiny. The old, familiar anger flickered inside me, but it was quickly doused by a wave of pity. My brother was a man haunted by a ghost of his own making. After he calmed down, he left for the office. And I went into his study. I was looking for financial documents, for my lawyer. And I found this. She unzipped the portfolio and carefully slid out a large, yellowed sheet of paper. It wasn't a document. It was a drawing. She handed it to me. It was a child's drawing, rendered in faded crayon. It depicted a stick-figure family standing in front of a lopsided house with a massive, smiling sun overhead. There were 4 figures. A tall one labeled Dad. A smaller one with a skirt labeled MOM. A medium-sized one with spiky hair labeled Marcus. And a tiny one with a triangle dress, holding the hand of the medium-sized one, labeled Clara. Scrawled in clumsy, childhood letters across the top were the words, "My family." It was a drawing I had made. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. I had no memory of it. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. I looked at Sarah, confused. "It was in the bottom drawer of his desk," she whispered, her own eyes glistening. "Under a pile of old contracts. It was framed." A sob caught in my throat. I traced the waxy, faded line of the crayon that connected the little Marcus stick figure to the little Clara one. He was holding my hand. "He loved you, Clara," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "The man he became, he buried that boy a long, long time ago. But he never threw that picture away. He kept it. All these years. Through all the fights, all the bitterness, he kept it." I held the drawing in my hands, feeling the fragile weight of it, of the memory it represented. A time before ambition, before resentment, before wills and companies and betrayals. A time when he was just my big brother, who held my hand. I cried then, for the loss of that boy. For the loss of that brother. Sarah came and sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders, and we cried together, two women bound by their love for a man who was lost to both of them, mourning the family that had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She left a little while later, leaving me with the drawing. I propped it up on my mantelpiece, a small, sad monument to what once was. The rain had stopped, and a weak, watery sunlight was breaking through the clouds, casting a soft, golden glow across my studio. I thought about going to him. About showing him the drawing. About trying to find that boy again. But I knew it was too late. The chasm between us was too wide, too deep. Some wounds are too profound to heal. The money from the buyout had given me freedom, a life of art and peace. But as I looked at that childish drawing, I realized that Marcus, in his desperate, flawed, and cruel way, had given me an inheritance too. He had given me the stark, painful clarity of truth. He had shown me the cost of ambition and the fragility of love. And in the end, that was a legacy far more complex, and perhaps more valuable, than any company could ever be. My father's final wish had been for me to have a future. And now, surrounded by my own creations, with the ghost of my brother's love sitting silently on my mantel, I finally understood that I had it. It wasn't the future he had drawn for me, but it was mine. And I would live it, with all its beautiful, broken, and complicated pieces.